So before we start the main talk about anxiety, understanding anxiety and how we deal with it, I would like to talk a little bit about practice. And I came across this quote by Bruce Lee. I think everybody knows Bruce Lee, but in case you don't, he was this famous young martial artist. He was born in Hong Kong, then moved to America, and then came back to Hong Kong to become this huge action movie star. And he did lots of stuff that nobody else could do. But he died very young, I think in his 30s. So that kind of sealed his fame, like James Dean. And one of the things that he said was that when you're in duress, when you're under stress or in a crisis, you do not rise to your expectations, but instead you fall to the level of your training. And that makes a lot of sense to me in terms of practice also. And if you look at Bruce Lee's life and his work, he also has this spiritual dimension to it. Anyway, so usually we think we'll learn something. Maybe it's some kind of martial arts technique. And then once we've learned it, we'll say, okay, when it comes time to use it, I'll figure it out. I'll do X, Y, Z when the situation arises, and then we'll get the result, A, B, C. But that's not what happens in reality. Because when you get into this crisis mode or you're under duress, your actual ability to be calm and focused and have a clarity of mind to do what is needed just goes out the window. You're just responding according to habit or instinct. That's all, There's none of this rational thinking and all this stuff. So that's why martial artists train as they do, even after they become very, very accomplished, like Bruce Lee. He trained every single day, I believe. Train against one of these wooden things and sparring with partners. Because the reason is that if you stop practicing, your training just goes down. You start to forget things. You forget how it feels to move in a certain way, what to do, your muscle memory starts to maybe deteriorate. But once we keep practicing, then we have this kind of habit of doing things that we don't even have to think about. That's why, we tie our shoelaces. We don't have to figure out how to tie our shoelaces every single morning because it becomes a habit. It's a habit because it releases our brain to focus on more important things. So you could even close your eyes. You could look away, talk to somebody, and tie your shoelaces. That's not a problem because it becomes a habit. It's a muscle memory. So practice is also like that. So the reason I'm saying this is that when you're experiencing good times, when your body is good, when you're not under any duress, like you're not having any financial duress or relationship duress or work duress with colleagues or whatever, then take the opportunity to practice because you have time. But when you are facing a crisis, like maybe somebody falls sick, your partner or your child or your parent, and you have to run to the hospital. My mother was, towards the end of her life, very sick, and you cannot imagine how little time you have for yourself. I was just driving to the hospital, bringing people back, seeing the doctor, spending time in the hospital. I had very little time for myself. So that's where the practice kicks in. You sort of if your practice is already there, you've got a solid foundation, then you just draw on it. You just settle into your practice, wherever the level of your practice is. So the more that you maintain a regular practice, the more that you can depend on it. It's kind of like a I guess we can call it insurance policy that you can draw on when you need it. So it is very, very helpful. So I'm not saying that you have to practice every single day, but do make it regular, like practice most days. Like this Dan Harris who does this 10% Happier podcast says, try to practice daily-ish. So you don't feel so bad if you miss a day, but you do keep this regular-ish practice going. And you can also try practicing short moments during the day. Like, all these short moments that you have, like minute and a half, I call these the 3 M's, mini meditations many times. So if you do that, it also adds up, because what is practice? It's paying attention in the moment. And then your day is filled with moments. It doesn't have to be a long 30-minute stretch. If you learn to pay attention like 1 minute, then you realize, I can do that. I can literally pay attention for 30 seconds and my mind is focused and clear. If that happens, then you could extend it for a bit more. Whatever you're doing, chopping vegetables, digging the garden, driving a car, whatever it is, then you learn to be able to bring your mind to the present moment regularly, and that grounds you also. So that's my kind of spiel for encouraging you to kind of bring practice into your daily lives. And now let's talk about anxiety and how we can deal with it. So first of all, I hope you're all well. If you are in Malaysia, you're probably experiencing a heightened sense of anxiety, as I have too, I'm sure those of you who've gone through like a big surge in the COVID-19 infections will understand what I'm talking about. But now when I go out, even for exercise, the things that you have to be aware of, not to be too close to people, make sure that they have a mask on, or if they don't, you have a mask on. And, it's all those little things that add to your need to be aware of a potentially risky situation for your health. So, even like a month ago, I wasn't worried. I wasn't so I didn't have this certain level of anxiety. But now, these days, because of all these spiking cases, then suddenly, I notice, I'm actually watching out for whether people are wearing their masks, and if they're wearing the masks, are they wearing them properly? They're not got them sort of under their chin, and I'm very aware of my need to maintain distance to anybody, because, basically, you don't know whether whoever has the virus could transmit, because a lot of cases are now asymptomatic. So anxiety levels, I'm sure, are definitely higher in Malaysia, and it may be where you are as well. So, and it's not easy to deal with it. We like to think of ourselves as rational beings. We can tell ourselves, oh, well, if you do this, you don't have to be so anxious. We like, perhaps we think of ourselves a bit like we're a bit like Spock in Star Trek, except that we have some emotions, that we're always very rational about things. We weigh the pros and cons and then come to a reasoned, logical decision. But the truth is, we are not like that. We are very unlike that, in fact. And this Nobel laureate for economic science, Professor Kahneman, showed that we do not calmly calculate the risk and rewards of each action. And we often make decisions from an emotional basis, and we overvalue the risks and undervalue the rewards. So the things that we think are risky, we kind of attach a much, much bigger value to it. Things which we feel are rewarding, not so much. So if you think about it, it really does make sense, because early in our evolution, when we were living in caves, if you were alive then, maybe you hear a rustling. It's at night, and you hear a rustling in the bushes. So is it a tiger? Or is it just some small harmless animal? We don't know. It's an uncertain situation. And normally our kind of fear instinct, our survival instinct will kick in, and we'll just retreat back into the cave, bringing our children with us, and maybe we'll grab a spear, some fire, and then retreat back to a place where it is more safe and we can defend ourselves. So probably 9 times out of 10, it is nothing dangerous. Probably just some small animal, small bird, whatever, and everything is fine. But at one time, it is a tiger. And then because you went back in the cave, you will be able to be safe, or you were able to defend yourself. Now imagine if you were one of these people that didn't take these warnings seriously. You were very cool about things, very relaxed. So 9 times out of 10, you don't have a problem. But that one time that it turns out to be a saber-toothed tiger, basically you're dead meat. So what happens with that person is that their genes don't get passed on. This kind of lackadaisical or relaxed gene, not really scared of stuff, or maybe not smart enough to be scared of stuff, doesn't get passed on. The genes which make us a little fearful, run into the cave, take care of ourselves to survive, those get passed on down the generations. And here we are. So we have this. So fear is not something bad. It's actually a survival instinct. It is a very, very primitive response. And like I said in past talks, it is actually controlled. The fear response is controlled by a very primitive part of our brain called the amygdala. It doesn't even go through the more modern part of our brain, which is our prefrontal cortex, which deals with logical reasoning, cognition, and all this sort of stuff. So that's because we have to survive. When a saber-toothed tiger, or if you think there's a saber-toothed tiger, you don't want to be kind of trying to figure out what your options are. You just want to get yourself out. So it's a survival response to keep us alive. But, and this is a kind of a big but, in our modern society, there is actually very little that will actually kill us or threatens our life in that way. You walk down the street, you're not going to get some saber-toothed tiger jumping out at you or whatever dangerous animal. So we basically don't have to worry about life and death so much, but we still carry this habit. It's in our genetic makeup or our habit. So how it shows up is we respond in the same way to things which we feel threaten us emotionally, or we may perceive to be a possible physical threat. For example, even though it's not a life or death situation, your boss may say, if you don't pull up your socks and meet targets for next month or whatever, I'm going to cut your commission or cut your pay. Or one that really causes people a lot of anxiety is public speaking. Having to stand up and speak in front of a big audience. That's what most people fear the most. But it's not life and death. But the point is that we respond in the same way. The fear response kicks in. Our heart starts to pump, adrenaline starts to be released into the body, and we kind of get all tense, and our vision gets very focused. You can't see much peripheral things. You just focus on one thing, and it can get very anxious. So we tend to react in that way to anything that we feel might be a threat, even though it isn't actually a real threat to our current life. And that's because of our genes that we inherited. So that's how we are. Our rational brain can't tell us, oh, don't be afraid. Like if you're really anxious about public speaking, have you tried actually saying to yourself, calm down, calm down? Doesn't work. Because that's not the part of the brain that is making you anxious. It's your primitive brain. So we really react to fear. So and we don't behave rationally. We don't weigh up the pros and cons. Like in Malaysia, very recently, we had this huge thing about the AstraZeneca vaccine. And the reason for this is because there's a very, very, very small percentage of people who had an adverse reaction, blood clots, to this. And so when the Malaysian government got the first delivery of AstraZeneca from COVAX, they said they're going to, include it as part of the general vaccination program that was already started rolling out fairly slowly. And a lot of people just objected. They were very unhappy. Social media was full of people saying, I'm not going to take the vaccine if they offer it. So then they pulled it out and made it an opt-in. That means you had to register specially for this vaccine. And so the response was okay. The first batch was not a lot, maybe about 100,000. It got taken up. Then recently we had a spike in the coronavirus, and suddenly everybody wants this vaccination. So something changed, but the data hasn't changed. So if we look at the data from the United States, I'm sorry I'm getting a bit scientific on you, but many people didn't want it because they feared they're going to get blood clots. Like you hear about somebody being in a plane crash, like in many years ago, the MH370 happened, and then my mother said, "You're going to fly? You're going to take a flight?" But actually flying is one of the safest forms of transport. Not very environmentally friendly, but safe. So in the UK, where the AstraZeneca vaccine is the main vaccine for the population, they make it there, the risk of serious harm For a 25-year-old, it's about 11 people in 1 million. And for older people, like 59-year-olds, it's like 4 in 1 million. It's tiny, a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage. If you compare that against getting COVID and dying from it, for young people, it's 23 in 1 million. That's twice as many. And for older people, at 59-year-olds, it's like 800 to 1 million. That means like a few hundred times more. So actually, the risk of dying from COVID are much, much higher than getting a blood clot from this vaccine. But everybody like, I might get the blood clot. So just for another comparison, dying from an accident, young people, 25-year-olds, 38 in 1 million, much higher than the getting harmed by the vaccine. And for older people, a little less. Maybe we drive a bit slower, more careful. 23 people in 1 million will die. So that's the data. And if we were rational, we would say, yeah, it's a no-brainer. Get the vaccine. But that is not what is operating in most of us. It's an emotional response based on fear and based on emotions. So we overvalue the risks much, much higher, even though the actual data tells us differently. So then we make decisions which are suboptimal. Like I personally know of some older people who don't want to take a vaccine because they've read certain things on social media which are actually unsupported without evidence, but it's just hearsay. And then they decide, I'm not going to take it. I'm scared. And that's what happens to us when we, that's how we respond to things. We vastly overvalue the risks and undervalue the rewards. That's why it's so hard. There's so much vaccine hesitancy here. Like recently, I just read that since April to this month, in the whole of Malaysia, about 50,000 people missed their vaccination appointments. Most of them are old people. So what causes anxiety about things is a combination of fear and uncertainty about the future. So there's something which scares us, and then we don't really know what the outcome might be. And then that combination of fear and anxiety, fear and uncertainty makes us anxious. And it can kind of feed on itself as well, in that it can be the fear of getting anxious. So the fear of getting anxiety, we don't know when the next anxiety attack might come, and we fear that, and we're uncertain. Then we get anxious, and then we get an anxiety attack. So that triggers it. So if we look kind of clearly at the kind of how the mechanism, perhaps, we can see that it is a habit loop. Something triggers, there's a trigger. So it may be a negative thought, like if you have to stand up to give a speech, I'll look stupid, or I'll say something stupid, or people will think that I don't know what I'm talking about. Then that leads to some kind of behavior. You worry about looking stupid, or you worry about saying something stupid. And then the result is that you get anxious. You start to worry and get anxious, and anxiety becomes and then this anxiety can become the trigger for more anxiety. You're worried about being worried, and it goes round in this loop. So it's a habit loop that goes on, and then if it doesn't, if you don't find some kind of coping mechanism or some way to kind of break the cycle of anxiety, then it can develop into a full-blown anxiety or panic attack. So we call it a habit loop because as we keep repeating it, we keep reinforcing it. And it is just like cause and effect or karma. So actually it's like a kind of Buddhist psychology, to be quite honest with you. There's an original cause, which is the trigger. Then there's a condition, which is like the behavior or the situation surrounding the thing. Then there's the result of the trigger, condition, result. So, and this habit gets reinforced. The more often you get anxious, the more likely you're going to get anxious. It's like this, it becomes easier to do. It's like becomes kind of like a muscle memory. So that's why we have the saying, we are creatures of habit. So why is it so hard to calm ourselves down when we're anxious? Someone tells, have you ever been anxious? And then someone says to you, oh, calm down, calm down, calm down. And, you hate it because it doesn't work. They're talking to the part of the brain that is not responsible for your anxiety. Your logical brain, your rational brain, which is up here, is not the one that's making you anxious. It's actually your whole kind of your amygdala, your primitive brain, this habit loop. And to actually do something about it, we have to change this habit loop. So, as I've said before, fear is a very important part of our survival instinct. It's not bad for us. It helps us to survive. But in our modern day, it can be, maladaptive, that we do not, it leads us to outcomes which are not so helpful for us. But the thing about it is because, like as I said before, we overvalue things which are negative, which are risky. So to get some idea of the scale of this, Professor John Gottman of University of Washington, he found that it takes at least five positive interactions to balance out one negative one. So 5 positive to 1 negative at least. So that tells you a bit about how strong our negativity bias is. So when we're anxious, it's not so easy to kind of just put it down, let it go, because it's a too strong a habit. So these are the kind of karmic habits that we have developed or built up over our lives. And because they are habits, we can change them. But it does require some work, some practice. And if we want to change the way we respond to things, to be less anxious, to be less prone to anxiety attacks and all that, then we have to understand that we can't just think it away. You can't just tell ourselves, oh, stop being anxious, you'll be fine. Because it doesn't work that way. So next week, I'd like to discuss that. And, as you probably have guessed, mindfulness has a lot to do with it. Being aware of what is going on in our head, what is going on in our bodies, actually has a lot to do with how we can help ourselves deal with our anxiety habit loops. And so I'd like to leave that for next week.